Look at the Sichas, volume 28, the Sicha of Behaalosecha 2, the Sicha on Karban Pesach. So the Torah tells us in this portion that it came to pass a year after Exodus, it was time to bring the Karban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, and everybody brought it, and there were people who were impure and they couldn't bring it. So they claimed to Moshe and they complained, why should we be excluded? That's what the verses say. It's on top of the screen, verses 1 through 5. Lama Nigara, the Rebbe makes a big deal. This shows their love for the mitzvah, which actually triggered Pesach Sheni. Lama Nigara, a Jew is supposed to complain. Don't take it sitting down. How come? Why should we be excluded? Says the Rebbe, I have a basic question. That's the main question I have in bold. This is the main operative question in the Sicha. What's their argument? They're impure. Remember, the Rebbe is asking this question on a pshat level. You know, you could tell me, al pi Chassidus, that a Jew should never give up and complain. I get it, but when you make an argument, why should we be excluded? Here's why: you're impure. Everyone knows that an impure person cannot eat holy sacrifices. They already learned it in Parshas Tzav. They learned it much earlier. They knew the law. So what's the argument? What's the argument? We take a look in Rashi, and we figure Rashi is going to help us. Rashi says on the words, Lama Nigara, why should we be excluded? That's his Dibra HaMaskal, his entry. That Moshe said to them, sacrifices can't be offered in impurity. But they said, let the blood be sprinkled by us, for us, by pure Kohanes, and the meat will be eaten by the defiled. We'll have the blood sprinkled by pure Kohanes. That's not an issue. The Kohen that sprinkles the blood is pure. And we'll eat the meat as defiled people. That is what the Rashi says, and this doesn't answer any questions. This doesn't make it easier, it makes it more difficult. So that's their argument. What's their argument? Lama Nigara, why should we miss out? What do you mean, why? You're impure. Yeah, the Kohen will sprinkle the blood, and we'll eat it. How could an impure person eat holy objects? So that becomes a very strong question on the text, and even with the Rashi, it's not helpful. So the Rebbe comes along and says the Rashi's commentaries have this problem. They all got this problem. And they believe that a mistake, an error crept into the Rashi. Often as the Rashi was copied and printed, what have you, was typed over. And it could have been mistakes. And there were mistakes. And this may be one of those mistakes. And it seems that most of the commentators of Rashi agree that this is a mistake. That instead of saying, the last line of the Rashi, that the meat will be eaten by defiled, it will be eaten by undefiled. Because it doesn't make sense to say that the meat should be eaten by defiled people. How does that make sense that impure people should eat a sacrifice when we know that that's disallowed? That's one of the basic rules the Jews were taught way back when the Mishkan was first erected and the service began in Vayikra, Tzav, Shmini. So therefore, they're saying it's a correction. Who is this undefiled person that should eat the meat? So the Rebbe says you look in the commentaries of Rashi, and there's two perspectives of how they deal with it. By and large, the commentaries of Rashi all are a consensus that there's a mistake in this Rashi. That their argument was the Kohen should sprinkle the blood, and the meat will be eaten by undefiled people. Seemingly, they solved all the problems. The Kohen is undefiled, and the eaters will be undefiled. But who exactly are those eaters? Now that we're saying that Rashi has a mistake, who are those eaters that are undefiled? So Rashi, commentaries on Rashi give two perspectives. Some of them say they meant themselves. What do you mean undefiled? They're defiled. Aha! Because the seventh day of their sprinkling of the ash of the red heifer, which makes them pure, would be Erev Pesach. As is even brought in the Medrash, that there's an opinion that that was the case. So Erev Pesach, they're still impure, but by the time the night comes and it's time to eat it, they'll be pure. So there you go, presto. During the daytime, they're still impure. So pure Kohanes will do it on their behalf. The Kohanes are pure, and they're doing the sprinkling of the blood, the whole offering. Let them offer. You need us to eat it. When it comes to Seder time, when it comes nighttime, we'll be pure because that's the seventh day. That's one approach. The Rebbe says that this doesn't really make sense in Pshat, on the Pshat level, because first of all, Rashi doesn't hint to this at all. If this is what Rashi's saying, take a look at the Rashi. Let the blood be sprinkled by pure Kohanes, and the meat will be eaten by the undefiled. It means them. Rashi just says undefiled, l'tahorim, like as if it's some abstract person. Should have said we shall eat it at night. We'll be pure. I mean, Rashi gives zero hint to this. Plus, if this is the case, the way Rashi's commentaries say, that they were planning to eat it themselves, and this would mean that the Rashi's relying on that opinion in the Medrash that this was their seventh day, A, Rashi would have hinted to it, but B, then their argument would be, we are impure, but we're going to be pure. Remember, Rashi is pshat. Rashi's commentary explains text to the closest level to the actual text as possible. The text doesn't hint anywhere that their argument was, yeah, we can eat it, we're pure. We're not yet pure, but we'll be pure. The text should have said, we're impure, but we're going to be impure. That's the argument. That's the argument. It holds water. But what did they actually say to Moshe Rabbeinu? Anachnu tmeim l'nefesh adam. We're impure. Why should we lose out? So clearly the text does not support, so to speak, that this is what it really means on the pshat level, and therefore the Rebbe doesn't embrace that perspective, number one, given by many other commentaries of Rashi, that that's what Rashi meant. Then there's a perspective too, which other commentaries on Rashi give, and that is, no, they weren't saying that they should eat it. They were saying others will eat it. We will plan in advance. We know that when you have the Paschal Lamb, you're supposed to have menuyim. You're supposed to have a list of people that will eat it, and there has to be enough of a kazayis for each person, and there has to be enough people so nothing will be left over, etc., etc. We will include in our group other people, and we'll be part of the group. And the sprinkling is done on our behalf, so we get the sacrifice. We can't eat our sacrifice, so other people will be included, and they'll eat a little extra. They'll eat ours. That's what it might mean. And then it would make sense that that's what they argued. The highlighted part. Let the blood be sprinkled by pure Kohen, so there's pure Kohens. Nobody's impure. The food has to be eaten. Other people will eat on our behalf. We'll bring a few extra people into the group, and they'll eat a little extra. The meat will be eaten. We'll make sure the meat's not left over. By who? By undefiled people. Who? Other people. And there's a precedent to this. The sin offerings. There are sin offerings. Sin offering basically is brought on behalf of a person who needs to be cleansed. The meat that's eaten, the parts that are eaten by the Kohen. So here you already have an example that one person is getting the absolvement of the sin through the sacrifice. One person, the blood is sprinkled on their behalf, and others are eating it. So it's not like it's an unheard of concept. And especially there are examples of sin offerings which the Kohen is eating the meat, and the object, the person for whom they're getting atonement, is still impure. The purity did not kick in yet fully. One is example a mother who gave birth after the period of times that's counted, and another is a mitzora, a leper. And in both cases, they're still in some status of impurity. It has to wait till the next day, what have you, till nighttime. But in the interim, the sacrifice is brought on their behalf, so they have atonement, and the certain parts of the meat of the sacrifice of the sin offering that has to be eaten by the Kohen are eaten. Meanwhile, the subject of the sacrifice is still impure. So what? That's not a problem. They're not the ones eating it, so there's no issue. These are examples in halacha, two such examples. And therefore, and that's also brought down in the Medrash, such an opinion that that's what they meant. And that's how perspective two of the commentaries of Rashi say that's what Rashi meant. That who's going to eat it? Undefiled people. Who? Other people. So Rebbe doesn't accept this either. And the reason is because eating is pivotal to the Paschal Lamb. Maybe on some halachic level you can say this, but on a Rashi level, the text makes it very clear. By the first Pesach, which was brought a year ago, and even by this Pesach, it's the same rules. And what is the rules of Korban Pesach? It's all about eating. It's all about eating, and everyone has to make sure there's enough people, and there's enough meat, and everybody has to eat. That's the emphasis in Parshas Bo when the Korban Pesach was first given. Make sure you have enough eaters and enough food to go around. The whole thing is about eating. This is not like a sin offering, which the Kohen eats a few pieces, and you're exempt. This is about you eating it. That's how you do the mitzvah of the Paschal lamb. You eat the meat. So you're telling me someone else is eating it? That doesn't make sense. And there's no hint to this in Rashi. If Rashi was saying such a mind-blowing chiddush, mind-blowing innovation, if that's what they meant, to come up with a new concept, the Pesach Sheni, which is all about eating. Eating by who? By the owners. The mitzvah is done by eating it. That no, in this case, other people are eating it. Rashi should have at least hinted to that. Because it doesn't make sense also on the pshat level. So therefore the Rebbe does not accept either one of these perspectives. So we're back to the main question. What was their argument? How could they come along and scream, Lama Nigara, why should we be excluded? What do you mean, why? You're impure. And if you think Rashi is trying to help us by saying they should be included because the Kohen will sprinkle the blood and the defiled people will eat it, that doesn't make any sense. They're defiled. And if you go by the commentaries, you say that Rashi has a mistake. I'm doing a quick recap. And really, it's supposed to say, eat by undefiled. Who are those undefiled people? So then we have the one approach, and undefiled people is themselves. That happened to be the seventh day. Rashi should hint to that. And the text should hint to that. Their argument should say, we want to eat it because we're going to be pure, not because we're impure. So why do they only speak about the impurity when they should have spoken about their purity? And the perspective, too, that when they said other people who are undefiled should eat it, it means other people. Carbon Pesach is all about you eating. There's no hint to that in Rashi, and it doesn't align with the text in great detail in the description of the Paschal lamb that it's all about the eating. So we have a big problem. What does Rashi mean? Or more importantly, basically, what does the text mean? What was their argument? So, I once again put the whole conversation on the screen. Let's see if I can move this out of the way. I put their whole conversation on the top. I put the text and the Rashi, and of course, the conclusion of the prior screen was still left with the main question. What was their argument? And as I write under the box, neither approach of commentary is satisfactory. Neither that it was their seventh day, nor that others should eat for them, as explained earlier. It's a big problem. You're learning Chumash, you're learning Rashi, Lama Nigara. Why should we be excluded? And why not? Of course you should be excluded. So the Rebbe steps back and the Rebbe says, first, let's look at this Rashi. And the Rashi has problems of its own. The Rashi seems very, very strange from beginning to end to the middle. And once we deal with them, you see, we're going to discover that Rashi has a whole different meaning than we think on the face of it. Rashi, there's something bothering Rashi that he's answering by this whole entry. Once we figure that out, what's bothering Rashi and what Rashi's saying, we'll have an answer to our pivotal question, namely, what was their argument? But first, we're stepping away from that, and we're exploring this Rashi from the Rebbe's perspective, through the Rebbe's eyes. Says the Rebbe, the Rashi, which is on top of the screen, has a few problems. First of all, the header is very curious. Why should we be excluded? Lama Nigara. The Rebbe maintains that Rashi's Rashi's header is very precise. Rashi doesn't just pull words from the verse in order to then write his entry. The words that he pulls from the verse are perfect. Rashi is writing this in a way that all the questions that he's answering are understood implicitly, because he doesn't want to create new problems for the student. He's just looking to solve the problems when the student discovers them, which is part of the brilliance of the Rashi. And of course, the way the Rebbe unfolds it for us. And therefore, part of that is that Rashi will choose words, the Dibra Maskal, the entry from the verse, the header, let's call it, from the verse. He will choose those words on which he's trying to explain. He will choose those words which cause the need for the entry to begin with. Now, if you were writing this Rashi, what would be those words? What would be the header that you would focus on? Right? Rashi is trying to explain their argument. Lama Nigara, like we don't want to miss out. But is that what their argument is? Their argument is the rest of the verse. Why should we be excluded from offering the Carbon Pesach? Lebilti Hakrib is Carbon Hashem. So Rashi should have even either quoted that whole phrase. Why should we be excluded from bringing the offering? They're not just saying, why should we be excluded? They're saying, why should we be excluded from the offering? Or at least put an etc., which is very common. Rashi doesn't do that. He stops short. Why should we be excluded? From what? From when? Nothing. And that's his header. That's question one. Again, it's a question, it's a diuk. It's telling. It's going to indicate what Rashi's trying to accomplish with his entry. Question two. That in the conversation, right, that they had with Moshe Rabbeinu in the Rashi, this is this Rashi, so Moshe said to them, sacrifices can't be offered with impurity. They said, why should we exclude him? Moshe said, you can't, you're impure, you can't do sacrifices. Says the Rebbe, that's obvious. Like, the Rashi is presenting it as if Moshe is teaching them something new. What they didn't notice already. This is in Parshas Tzav, a book ago. Moshe could have said, but you're impure. That would make sense. They say, why should we exclude him? Moshe said, but you're impure. No, Moshe said to them, sacrifice can't be offered with impurity. He's giving a lecture. You're teaching me something new. The Jews didn't know this. They did know this. It says it in a book prior. It even says it here. The prior verse, the Torah says, in our verse, that there were people who were impure in our verse, number one. And they were unable to bring the Paschal Lamb. Why? Because they were impure. And everybody knew it. And then they came over and tried to get a special pass. So why is Moshe trying to teach them something as if they don't know it when they know it? It's like I'm trying to get onto this subway, but I don't have a token. So I say, why should we be excluded? Well, subway riders need tokens. I mean, that's ridiculous. I'm dating myself when I talk about tokens. I don't think they have them anymore. You could say, I'm sorry, but we can't make an exception. But when you come and you start teaching me like from A, like subway riders need tokens, like as if I'm stupid. That's how Moshe spoke to them. They say, why should we be excluded? Sacrifices can't be brought in impurity. Didn't they know that? It says it in the text. They were impure, that's why they were unable to bring it. Such a strange language in Rashi. Then the Rebbe says in general, we're in the pshat, in the simple text of this conversation, is this whole back and forth conversation hinted. Rashi is based on text. The text says that they were impure people and they approached Moshe and they complained. And Moshe said, okay, let me ask Hashem. But Rashi is saying, no, it wasn't so simple. They complained that Moshe said to them, but you can't because you're impure. And they came back and said, we have a solution. We'll split the difference. The Cohens will do this. The pure people will do this. This is a medrash. It's in the Sifri, granted. But where is it hinted in the text? Rashi brings down medrashic interpretations or narratives only if the text warrants it. Who said on the text level, on the pshat, on the literal level of Torah study, that this conversation ever happened? Like, why do you need it? These are like very strong questions. Like, what does Rashi want? Why is he teaching me a medrash here? Keep it simple. Finally, there's another part that's very obvious. In their supposed solution, in their suggested solution, they said, we have an idea. The blood will be sprinkled by pure Kohanes. And the meat will be eaten by well, of course the Kohen has to be pure. Again, you're telling me something that I know. There's nothing new. It's kind of strange that you should say the blood shall be sprinkled. You should say the blood will be sprinkled by the Kohanes. Like, why would he not be pure? It's not like everybody was impure. This group was impure. So you said the blood should be sprinkled by the Kohanes. And the meat will deal with one of the other solutions. But the blood was sprinkled by the Kohanes, so it's not an issue. The Kohanes is not here dealing with impurity. But the emphasis in Rashi is they said the blood will be sprinkled by pure Kohanes. Again, like, it's obvious. Again, you're teaching me basics. And this question bothers the Rebbe even more because this particular detail, that they suggested that the Kohanes that sprinkled the blood will be pure, which is an obvious thing, is not brought in the Medrash. Those words are not in the Sifri, which is Rashi's source. So Rashi actually innovated a new concept, which seems, extra, totally unnecessary. So these are the 4 questions that the Rebbe asks. The whole Rashi is strange. So the Rebbe is going to explain it by stepping back and saying what's bothering Rashi, which is really the main question. We ask 4 questions on Rashi. When we start taking apart the Rashi, we don't understand the header. That's question 1. We don't understand why Rabbi Moshe has to teach them basics. Question 2. And why we even in Pshat think there was a back and forth. That's question 3. And why they're teaching Moshe basics about the Kohen being pure. That's question 4. These are all detailed problems. But there's a bigger problem. It's almost like, why do we even need a Rashi? What's wrong with the verse? This is not explicit in the Sicha, but whenever the Rebbe steps back and says, let me tell you what's really bothering Rashi, that's what he means. That's what the Rebbe means. Why is there a need for a Rashi? And it's a very midrashic Rashi. The text says there were impure people. They couldn't bring the Paschal Lamb. They complained. Why should we be excluded? So Moshe said, let me ask Hashem. And he got them the Pesach Sheni. It's a beautiful story. What's not understood? What don't you understand with this verse? Why should we be excluded from offering the sacrifice? What's bothering Rashi? Says the Rebbe, I'll tell you what's bothering Rashi. What's bothering Rashi is something that jumps out from the text. Rashi's job is to teach the person, a 5-year-old child, or the person learning on the basic level of Pshat, that when they just read the text, and they know what they learned in the past, they don't know Gemara, they don't know other things, but they know the Chumash well, the problem will arise. And Rashi's here to correct that. And that is a basic problem. What do they say? Why should we be excluded from bringing this offering, this sacrifice? Nowhere until this point was Korban Pesach referred to as a sacrifice. Nowhere. They're coming along saying, we want to bring the sacrifice. Levilti Aktiv Korban Hashem. We want to bring the sacrifice. Whoops, that's news. I never heard that it's a sacrifice. Where did you find that? Which book? It's not written anywhere in this section, and it's certainly not written in the prior year when it was brought the first year, which in fact was not a sacrifice. But even in this thing, I'm quoting you on the screen, chapter 9, verse 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it says that Hashem told Moshe, tell the Jews they should do the Pesach. V'yasu b'nei Yisrael. And v'yasu, they should do it in its time. And Moshe instructed the Jews to do the Pesach, and they did it. Doesn't say anywhere the word korban, not once. Doesn't say it's a sacrifice, doesn't say hikriv, they should offer up. It just says they should do what? The Pesach. The Pesach. Not a sacrifice, it's not an offering, it's a Pesach. It's a dinner. Suddenly the people come along and say, we don't want to miss out on the sacrifice. That's bothering Rashi. That's a big problem. The text itself maybe didn't bother Rashi. Why are they complaining? Why are they asking for a right to bring the sacrifice? Because they feel bad to lose out on a mitzvah. Okay, I can accept that. It's still a question, like, what's their argument? But on a pshat level, people don't like to be left out. We call it FOMO. In a serious way, that means they wanted the mitzvah. Great, that's not such a problem. But the problem is that the text switches. Suddenly they're introducing a new definition of the Korban Pesach, that is Korban Hashem. We want to have the chance, the Hikriv Korban Hashem, to offer up the sacrifice of God. What are you talking about? Which sacrifice is that? It has been known as the Pesach, simply the Pesach lamb. This is a question in text. Says the Rebbe, this indicates that something happened. There was a conversation between them and Moshe Rabbeinu in the interim. There was a back and forth. And they discovered new information that this, in fact, is an offering. Aha! So Rashi's forced to borrow from the Sifri, from the Medrash, and put it into Pshat. That yes, they learned something new in the interim. Which this will answer questions 1-4, but we'll do that in a second. What did they learn in the interim? They learned that Pesach is now also becoming an offering. Let's unpack this. That what they came to Moshe Rabbeinu, they didn't think it was an offering. There was no reason for it to be considered an offering. It wasn't referred to anywhere as an offering. It was referred to as the Pesach, the Paschal Lamb. And as it was referred to the first year, when it was brought a year ago, nowhere there is it referred to as carbon. It's called Zebach Pesach, the Paschal Lamb butchering, dinner. Suddenly they're calling it a carbon and demanding a right to bring the carbon because Moshe must have taught them something in between. There was a conversation. So Rashi's, I'll tell you what the conversation was. The conversation took place. It was short and sweet, but in that conversation they learned, it's no longer just a Pesach. It's becoming an offering. I know last year was just some kind of a dinner. Today it's become a carbon Pesach, a sacrifice because we have a Mishkan. So what short conversation could have accomplished that in the interim? The conversation that the Medrash quotes from that the Sifri says. They came to Moshe and they said, why should we be excluded? Why should we be excluded? Because in their mind, this is not a sacrifice. That's why Rashi in his header does not say, etc. They weren't saying, why should we be excluded from bringing a sacrifice? They didn't know it was a sacrifice. They just said, why should we be excluded? Period. Not even an etc. Which answers question one. Because to their knowledge, it was known just as the Paschal Lamb. Why should we be excluded? Because we're impure. Last year the sacrifice was brought, then the carbon Pesach was brought, the Paschal Lamb, year one. And many Jews may have been impure. Nobody made it a problem. Parenthetically, many Jews probably were impure because they buried their dead in the plague of darkness. I don't know. But it doesn't matter. There isn't any discussion there that you have to be pure. So last year they brought it in impurity. There was no red heifer. So they just said simply, why should we be excluded? No, etc. Now, why should we be excluded to bring the sacrifice? Why should we be excluded? This ain't a sacrifice. It's just a dinner. It's a dinner. That's a mitzvah. Got it, but it's a dinner. So Moshe said, no. This is a sacrifice. Something new is happening. All well and true that last year there was no such thing. It was just a lamb, a mitzvah lamb, but just a lamb. Today that Pesach is becoming also an offering. And it's a sacrifice. And sacrifices cannot be brought in impurity. So that answers question two. Well, Moshe is telling them, it seems obvious, but he's not there because he's trying to tell them the law. He's trying to emphasize that it now gets the status of a sacrifice. And you know the law, sacrifices can't be brought in impurity. Not teaching them the law, they know the law from Parshas Tzav. But he's evoking that law. Sacrifices can't be brought in purity, right? This is a sacrifice. That's the Moshe's innovation. They said, oh, it's a sacrifice. We thought it's just a Pesach. It's an offering too. So they came back though. Their love for the mitzvah wasn't going to have them take it sitting down. So they said, all right, if it's a sacrifice, let's split the difference. Let's have the pure Kohanes sprinkle the blood, and they'll bring the offering, and the meat will be eaten by somebody else. This will answer question 4. Why do they say pure Kohanes? Again, they're not trying to teach Moshe. They're not trying to make the obvious statement that the Kohen has to be pure. But they're saying, now that you're telling me that it's a sacrifice, and we're impure, I get it. But the Kohen's not impure. So they're not here trying to teach a lesson. They're trying to bring home the point that this could work. The Kohen brings the sacrifice, and the eating we'll deal with separately. In a minute, we're going to revisit the main question. And based on this, the Rebbe is going to answer that what? Now we're going to answer the main question, what was their argument? But before we do that, what we just did is we minimized the window of that question, and we analyzed the Rashi in detail. And we see from the Rashi, from the 4 questions, it's fun to have a Sicha on Pesach with 4 questions, that it's clear that this is not what it looks like. They didn't know that it's a carbon to begin with. They thought it's just like the offering of last year in Egypt. It's just a Pesach, a Paschal lamb. And that's why they had the conversation, and that's why Moshe told them what he said to them, because he was trying to point out that sacrifices can be brought in purity. Something happened in the interim, a conversation back and forth. They thought it's just a Pesach. Moshe introduced, no, it's an offering. So they said, if it's an offering, so let's have the Kohanes do the blood and we'll do the rest. It answers all the four questions of the Rashi. It answers why the header is cut short, because it's meant to be cut short. The question wasn't why should we be excluded from the sacrifice? Why should we be excluded, period? We don't even know that it's a sacrifice. And we explains why Moshe points out sacrifices can be offered in impurity, as said before. He's not trying to teach them that law. He's trying to emphasize that law kicks in here, because this is no longer just a Pesach, but rather it's become an offering. It explains where in Pshat is the back and forth hinted. It's hinted in this whole approach. It's hinted in the fact that the Torah refers to this ritual over and over and over 4 times as the word Pesach, that you should do the Pesach, and suddenly it's changed into be called sacrificing an offering. That's where it's hinted. There was obviously a conversation. You want to know what it looked like? Go to the Sifri, to the Medrash. That's what Rashi quotes it. And it answers question 4 as well, as said before, that they said to Moshe, if it's a sacrifice, so the Kohen, it has to be pure. Again, not trying to teach that basic law, but saying the Kohen has to be pure, but not us. So now we have a whole different look. And now the Rebbe is going to be able to answer the main question, what's their argument? They have a very good argument. But before we leave this screen, let's just emphasize that they were in their right to think that this was not a sacrifice with all the ritualistic restrictions. Because why should it be? Last year, it wasn't a sacrifice. There was no such thing as putting blood on the altar. It was just blood on the doorpost. But they didn't have to have a kohen. They didn't have to have purity. Nobody had, there's no concept. It was just a Paschal lamb. I guess like the mitzvah, you and I have to eat meat on Shabbos, but it was done with exact descriptions of what and when and how, but there's no sacrificial part of this. So why should they think it's different? Especially since the Torah explicitly says here that they were told to do it, unquote. This is like in verse 2, that they should do exactly what they were told by Exodus. So why should they think it's different? Further, there will not be another Paschal lamb until they get to the Holy Land. The only one that was brought was this year 2, for whatever reason. Year 1, obviously. Year 2, and that's it. It was done. For 38 years, there was no other Paschal lamb until they come to the Holy Land. So it's being done only one more time, clearly to reenact, if you will, what have you. So let's assume it's going to be done the same way. Why should we suddenly, for 1 year, create a new concept that it's no longer just a Pesach or a Zevach Pesach, a Paschal lamb, but rather it's a carbon Pesach? You're adding a second element of offering. They were in their right to think that. And that's why they came along and argued. So now that we have that approach, that they thought is just a Paschal, just a Pesach. And now they were introduced to the concept that it's an offering. Now we'll understand their argument even better. Says the Rebbe, as I unveil the next and final scene of our drama. Says the Rebbe, they just learned that Pesach is now also becoming an offering. It now has 2 titles. So what's their argument? I understand that now they found out that the Pesach is also an offering. But now that it's an offering, they should have gone home. Oops, we thought that's only a Pesach. They don't have to be pure. But now that it's an offering, all right, sorry, no complaint. No, they kept arguing. Levilti hakrib carbon Hashem. We want to do it, even though we know it's a carbon. And the answer is because once you look at it, if we look at Pesach and offering as separate elements, that was their attitude. They said, oh, last year was already a Pesach. It was a Paschal lamb without the aspect of carbon of offering. Now you're adding another aspect. So they saw them as 2 separate things. 2 mitzvahs put onto one. Could happen. The same animal, it will serve as the Paschal lamb for the Pesach dinner. It's a holy dinner with all of its things. But you know what? We also make it into a carbon. The Rabbi in a footnote points out that there's such a concept. The Jews, while they were living in the desert, they weren't allowed to eat meat without making it into a sacrifice. If they wanted to have dinner, they had to bring it as a sacrifice before they could eat it. This was the law that changed later when they came to the Holy Land. But in the desert, for whatever reason, that was the rule. You want to butcher? Pajalista, wonderful. But you have to include the sacrifice. So that's an example. What is that type of meat? It's regular lunch. Didn't have any laws of ritual, but you have to take. It's your own food. I don't know exactly what the restrictions were. It's your own food, but you also have to have the element of the sacrifice. So the two are two separate things, especially in this case. That this is a Pesach which they're grandfathering in from last year. The Pesach element. And then they're adding a new element of sacrifice, of offering. So they're two separate things. It's A and B. Aha! If it's A and B, we can't do both. Let's at least do one. And that will become the Rebbe's first approach. Their argument is, since it's two elements, and we now understand, Moshe Rabbeinu, thank you for explaining to us that this is an offering and it has purity and impurity laws, and therefore we cannot participate because we're impure. But wait a minute. The offering should be brought by the Kohen, and let he's pure, and he'll sprinkle the blood on our behalf. So we did the mitzvah of the offering. As far as the eating of the meat, let pure people eat the meat. Let other people eat the meat. We won't have that part of the offering. We won't, because we're not eating the meat, we're not going to get that part. We can't do everything, because clearly we can't eat meat of a carbon, because we're impure. But at least we can get the carbon aspect. It's a Pesach and a sacrifice. The Pesach part we can't do because we can't eat it. The sacrifice part we could do. Let's at least have that. You understand what the Rebbe is saying here? So you're going to say, what do you mean? How could you split the same animal into two halves? How can you say that the carbon part you will have? Because that's done on your behalf by the Kohen. And the Pesach part, it became like carbon Pesach, two parts. The ritualistic sacrificial part you'll have, because the Kohen does it on your behalf, like every sacrifice. The eating part you can have. How could you split the same animal? The answer is that was what their thinking was. Remember, this is a new concept. In fact, the Rebbe says in the footnote, that was Moshe's retort. I got to ask Hashem. It sounds nice, but the fact is, no, it's one thing. It now became a carbon Pesach. It's not a Pesach that's also a carbon, and you're splitting the difference and give me the carbon aspect through the Kohen. And let other people eat it, which would, by the way, be like a sin offering, where the Kohen eats it and I get my atonement, because I don't have to eat it. A regular Jew in a sin offering doesn't have to be part of the eating, and therefore he can do it. The Kohen does it for him, and the Kohen eats it for him. And therefore, that was their thinking. The brilliance in the Sicha is, number one, the way the Rebbe reads the text and points out that what's bothering Rashi is that suddenly they discovered that this is not a Pesach, it's also an offering. Brilliant, straight out of the text. But if that's the thinking, try to go back into their heads. So the Pesach remains with the laws of Pesach. The offering remains the laws of offering. We can't do A, let's at least do B. But again, like I said in the footnote, Moshe Rabbeinu's answer is that no, carbon Pesach is all one. You cannot divide it. It's not divisible. And it's not actually that Hashem is adding another element. That last year was just a Pesach. Now it's also an offering. So you can pick one without the other. It's a Pesach offering. And if you're impure, you can't be sacrificing this. And if you can't eat it, you can't be sacrificing on your behalf. This is not a sin offering. It's a carbon Pesach. It has the element of eating and the element of sacrificial part, and both have to be done in purity, etc., etc. So sorry it doesn't work. We need a Pesach Sheni. The whole thing makes sense. That's the Rebbe's first approach. Now the whole thing makes sense. Once we understand what was really their argument, and that they were introduced, this is the pivotal part of dissecting the Rashi and making sense of the Rashi and answering all the Rebbe's problems on the Rashi. That the net of the Rashi is that they now discovered something new that was heretofore just a Pesach, became also an offering. So I said, okay, so two things. Oh, and they were even more excited. They said, okay, great. Let's bring the offering part. We can't do the Pesach part because we can't eat, but we can bring the offering part. And that was even more exciting to them because that's now a new concept. It's a carbon. Aha! I don't have to bring an offering. A Kohen can bring it on my behalf. Just like a Kohen can bring an offering on behalf of a Yeldis, a woman who gave birth, or a leper, when they're still in a state of impurity. That's not a problem. A Kohen's pure. Brilliant. And the Rebbe says, as we would say in the language of Lumdus, Kivan Dasin Lahacha, once we've come to this place of understanding their thought process and the conversation that Moshe had with them, which is a necessity from the text, as explained before. And what their thought process was, that these two elements of Pesach and offering were really independent, and Moshe had to point out that they're not divisible. And the Rebbe says, I'm going to give you approach too. If you understand that, then we can go back and read the Rashi without the correction. Remember, the Rashi says the meat will be eaten by the defiled people, l'tmeim. All the commentaries seem to have a consensus that there must be a mistake. How could the Tameim eat? How could defiled people eat? So they all decided it's a mistake. It should really be l'tohayim undefiled. And the Rebbe went with that till now, because that's what all the commentaries on Rashi seem to have a consensus. But the Rebbe says that once you come up with this whole understanding, the aforementioned, I'm going to suggest that actually Rashi meant the original version, which, by the way, says the Rebbe, is much more logical that that's really what was written. The Rebbe says, how did mistakes come into these texts? Nobody did mistakes on purpose. The mistake is that somebody is rewriting or typing or whatever it is at some point in the process of copying or printing texts, setting type, and they read a word which makes no sense, so they reverse it. This is called the Bachar Hazetzer, the typist. It wasn't so much a typist, it was setting type in those days. And the typist was not necessarily the sharpest bulb, in the thing. It was more of a simple person, but he read what he's reading, and if it was something that jumped off the page that it doesn't make any sense, it would take the liberty to correct it. And that's how mistakes crept into the text. Says the Rebbe, if it would have said, the Bachar is reading that the food should be eaten by impure people, it would make sense that Bachar would say, no, pure, undefiled. Well, how could defiled people eat it? That would make sense. But to say that the opposite happened, that when he read it, it said the food should be eaten by pure, undefiled people. And he said, nah, let it be eaten by defiled people. That's not a rational thing. Why would he think to make that switcheroni? It's completely not logical. And therefore, says the Rebbe, mistakes have to have an explanation. The Rebbe is not completely negating that possibility, but it's not probable. Plus, the Rashi that we have is showing that that's what it says, that the meat is eaten by defiled, l'tmeim. So the assumption has to be that that was the print of Rashi for hundreds of years. Proof is that all the commentaries of Rashi, some of whom are hundreds of years old, that's the version that they had. And then they decided that it's got to be reversed. But that's the accepted version, that Rashi said the meat will be eaten l'tmeim, undefiled. And it makes sense that that's the version, that that's the correct version. Because if what is said the meat should be eaten by undefiled, why would the printer switch it and say, no, it should be eaten by defiled? That makes no sense. Says the Rebbe, so if that's the case, that's just the Rebbe's argument why it makes more sense to stick with the original version of the Rashi without the correction of the other version. This is brilliant. So the Rebbe is able to go back to the basic Rashi that we have without the correction. And the Rebbe says, yeah, I'll tell you what it means. That once they discovered that there's two elements here, the Pesach and the offering, and as I said before, they saw them as two separate parts, unrelated, because the Pesach is already grandfathered in from last year. The offering is a new element. So they said, okay, the Kohen will bring the offering in purity, because an offering requires purity. The offering part is done by the Kohen. He sprinkles the blood, but the eating, we'll eat it. You're impure. We're eating. We ate the food, the carbon pesach in impurity last year also. And again, they're assuming that the two things are not interrelated and not necessarily dependent one on the other. I can eat a Pesach lamb in impurity. We did it the first year. So the eating part we'll take care of. The carbon part, which is the new element, the Kohen will take care of. We're good to go. And you can maintain the Rashi version as is. And here too, apparently the Rebbe would say that Moshe Rabbeinu said that's a nice concept. I got to ask Hashem because I don't think that these two things are divisible. I don't think that you're right in your assumption that this offering element that's being added onto the pre-existing Pesach element is separate from the Pesach. It's true, it's being added, but the two become one. They become one concept, carbon Pesach. And I suggest, says Moshe Rabbeinu, that that's what Hashem is going to say, that the carbon Pesach is, and not that I suggest. I need to ask Hashem, because there's no way you can eat this, because it is a carbon, and therefore the eating part and the carbon part are one and the same, and therefore neither approach is going to work. Nobody else can eat this for you, because carbon pesach you have to eat. And you can't eat it because you're impure. Approach 1 or 2 wouldn't work, but nice try. The Rebbe concludes with a beautiful lesson. That you see the beautiful love that the Yidden have for the mitzvah. They wanted to have the Paschal Lamb, but the minute they heard it's a carbon, their emphasis was, we want to have the carbon aspect. They didn't say, why should we miss out or not eat the carbon pesach? Why should we not have the carbon, even if we can't eat? We could eat, we can't eat. Other people will eat, whichever way you're going to slice it. But what was their emphasis? Let the Kohen bring the carbon. The Rebbe points out, take a look at carbon pesach, the way the Rebbe presents it. I think there's a lot here at the end. It's written very short, but I think there's a powerful thing here at the end of the Sicha. Carbon pesach is the first introduction to the Jewish people with Hashem, as they're going on the way to Matan Torah. Of course, now we're already in year 2, but this is the beginning of the Jewish year. This is the beginning of the Jewish people. Just like Matan Torah itself has 2 elements. Let's call it top down, bottom up. Hashem comes down, the Jews go up. We're supposed to elevate ourselves through the spiritual parts of Yiddishkeit, which is kavana, davening, Abbas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, love of God, spirituality. And at the same time, Hashem comes down and brings us physical mitzvahs, that your physical tefillin, your physical mezuzah, your physical Shabbos licht has holiness, and diffusing it. Let's call it, bottom up, top down, which is Har Sinai. Destroying the gap between heaven and earth, etc., etc. That's Har Sinai. So perhaps that's what the Rebbe is saying. I'm trying to read a little bit between the lines, a little bit of a license I'm taking to read into this, that that's what he's saying, that the carbon pesach, it's the first mitzvah, and it's a carbon pesach. It's the mitzvah of pesach, which means to leap, to jump, to take us, to prepare us for that bridge between heaven and earth. It's going to have 2 elements. On year 1, looks like it had only 1 element. That's my kid. The Jews should eat a mitzvah food. Then the next year, no. There's 2 aspects. It's like it's after Har Sinai. We broke the gap. We're bringing us to heaven, and we're bringing Hashem down to us, and therefore there's going to be the aspect of a carbon, which is elevation. You sprinkle the blood. It's holy. It's Hashem's food, whatever that means. And then it's a mitzvah food. It's something physical, like food that becomes a mitzvah, and we digest it. It doesn't get more physical than that. It's both angles. The Rebbe doesn't explicitly say, but take a look at the Sicha, and I don't think this is such a big stretch that that's what the Rebbe means. Just like Har Sinai is breaking the gap, and it's Dira B'Tachtonim, elevating earth to heaven and vice versa. The carbon pesach, which is the prelude to that, or came right after it in this case, is really telling us that that's what the Jewish year begins with. There's a carbon, Halah of Amshach, is elevation. Elevate yourself, refine yourself, and then Hashem will come down and bring His essence into the physicality, which is the mitzvahs. The Rebbe points out that take a look how it works here. Hashem is worried about our part, about bringing Himself closer to us, and we're worried about Hashem's part. This is a common thread you have in many places in Torah. For example, the war on Midian, Moshe Rabbeinu, who represents the Jews, calls it Hashem's revenge. And Hashem, who, from his perspective, calls it the revenge for the Jews. Because each one really cared about the other more. In these two steps of halav, hamshach, elevation, and coming down, up and down, spiritualizing the physical, or infusing holiness into the physical, the elevation is for Hashem's sake, so to speak. And we should give him his food. We should become more refined. We should live more on his terms. And that's what was the Jews' passion. That's what these people said. We may not be able to eat it, but we want to bring the carbon. We want to do the elevation part. We want to give Hashem his carbon. Eat or not eat. We want to bring carbon Hashem. That's what they think about. And Hashem turns around and says, now I want to give you a Pesach Sheni. And you want to know what the main emphasis of the Pesach Sheni? Take a look at the text right after this. Hashem again doesn't use the word carbon, even though it clearly was a carbon. Even Pesach Sheni was a carbon. But Hashem doesn't use that word. Hashem says that they should make the Pesach, not the word carbon. They should make the Pesach a month later. Carbon is wonderful, but that's more for Hashem's sake, to connect us to Hashem's space of the divine light, etc. Ruchnius. Hashem's main emphasis is, I want you to have a holy meal. I want you to do the Pesach, which is the element that's for the benefit of the Jews, that in our physicality, we should touch Hashem. And of course, we need both, and that's the purpose of it all.